Hugh Mackay, it's wonderful to have you on a Stay Kind conversation. How are you?
I'm very well, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Jane.
Hugh, you have worked 60 years as a hands on social researcher, 22 books, including 8 novels. You're an honorary professor in the Research School of Psychology at the ANU. And your most recent book, The Kindness Revolution, I feel is a bit of a manifesto, particularly for a movement like the Stay Kind movement. And I wonder, I've heard that this was one of the fastest books you've ever written. Why was it so quick?
I think because it is a kind of there were two things about this book that made it quick. One was that I was writing it in the midst of the pandemic. I mean, it was during the lockdown when, by the way, there were no distractions. There was nothing else to do except get on with the writing. But also that gave it a kind of urgency because the starting point for the book was the impact of, first of all, the bushfires and then the pandemic in 2020. That's what was kind of the catalyst for the book. But then I realized that what I wanted to say about all this brought together a whole lot of themes from my work over all those years. So it's a book that's both ultra contemporary but has a sort of long perspective. So I was drawing on some quite familiar themes, and it all just poured out. I mean, I haven't had that experience before. A friend said to me once, he might have been quoting someone else, if it's enjoyable to write, it'll be enjoyable to read.
Well, it's highly enjoyable to read, I can guarantee you that. And thank you very much for taking the time to do that because it's such a necessary book for these times. Hugh, I want to take you back in time a little bit. I found this book, you revealed more of yourself than I think I've read in previous books. And I wonder, in the 1950s, when you set out to work in social research, you said your father picked that career for you. How did that come about?
Mm. Well, I still remember quite vividly the moment when I left school. I mean, literally the day that I walked out of the school gate at the end of 1954, with not the faintest idea of what I might do as far as work was concerned. I had a holiday job serving in David Jones, but that was only going to last for 3 or 4 weeks. And what was going to happen next? I mean, other boys at the school were talking about university courses they were going to. I didn't even know where Sydney University was. No one in my family had ever gone to university. But it was clear that I would have to get a job, but my parents were not prepared to support me to be a full-time student. And so my father, who worked in advertising, had heard of this new field called market research, media research, and he thought this might suit young Hugh. Now, I can't say I was ever very close to my father, and I didn't really feel as though he understood me or knew me very well. Perhaps he knew me better than I knew him. But he was right. He, I suppose, noticed that I was a bit of an observer. I mean, it wasn't that I didn't join in, but I was a very introspective kid, an avid reader, and very interested in observing what was happening. I mean, one of my favourite pastimes was climbing a tree in the street and just watching the passing parade from my hiding place in the tree. So he said, I think this could be an interesting job. So the way things were conducted in 1955, he came with me to my job interview. And yes, this was all explained, and it all seemed. I mean, we're talking about pre-computers. One of the main activities of this organisation was radio ratings, but also market research and social research of a wide range of stuff. So I just trotted along and started work, having no idea what this was all about, and was very quickly hooked on the idea that you could actually make a career. I suppose I didn't think of career then, but have a job which allowed you to be studying human behavior, whether, even if it was in a commercial context, any study of people's attitudes and behavior gives insights into what makes us tick. So right from the beginning, I thought this is for me. The employer said you must study economics for this business, because statistics and all that. So I enrolled as an evening student in economics, absolutely hated it, abandoned it after a year, and then switched to arts and absolutely loved it.
I wonder, in those early days, did you ever, or, subsequently, have you measured kindness as a national propensity?
That's a fascinating question, Jane. I haven't, but right now I'm consulting on a project which I can't say any more about than that it exists, with a major organisation who are developing a national kindness index, and I'm working. So that will be a first. It might even be a first internationally, but this is a very smart client of mine who said, well, promoting kindness is all very well, but how well are we doing? So we're trying to figure out a way of actually measuring people's experience of kindness and their attitudes to such questions as whether they think of Australia as a kind society or not.
I love that. I love that. I read recently that in a survey by the ABC that 79% of Australians believe that keeping the international borders shut until COVID-19 is under control, that seems like a very high number of people that want to, for whatever reason, isolate Australia. And I wondered whether, since you opened your book talking about an act of love, how we all went into lockdown and wore masks and kept off the streets and out of the shops, do you think closing borders is similarly an act of love, or does that kind of flip over into something else?
It's very complicated. And first of all, the first complication is you said 79% of Australians, but that ABC survey is among ABC audiences who volunteer to, so you can say 79% of volunteers from ABC audiences. Yes, it's not necessarily an accurate picture of the nation, but it might be.
And I should also point out that when we're recording this, it's late May 2021, which it's important to get the timing of that right, but yes. Please continue.
Yes. I think Australians feel now that they have done so, and they have done so brilliantly at keeping this under control, that they are broadly supportive of the idea of being very strict about who comes in, but shutting the borders is different from allowing Australians stranded overseas to come home. And I think the community, the outcry when the government talked about prison sentences or enormous fines for Australian citizens returning from India, that said to me, the kindness revolution may be getting underway, that the lessons of kindness we learned through the bushfires and the pandemic, and we always learn when there's a crisis, might be carrying on into protest against an absurdly draconian approach to closing the borders. But I think the general view would be Australians who want to come back should come back, as long as, of course, they are tested and quarantined. And yes. More generally, I think the Australian view, as with many countries in Europe who at various points have closed their borders to each other, have said, well, we've got to manage the situation here and we can't complicate it by just being open to the free flow of people. It's interesting that there was that outcry about the Indian question, a similar outcry on a totally different subject, Jane, but on the gender issues that have arisen from sexual impropriety in Parliament House and politics more generally and so on, and the whole new push of women wanting to assert their rights to equality and for their voices to be. I see that also as a continuation of what happened during the lockdown, we were more introspective. We were much more likely to think about what kind of life do we want? What sort of society do we want to become? What values do we really espouse? So whether it's to do with bringing Australians home or solving some of our outstanding social problems here, I'm hopeful that we are in one of those magic moments in our history where a bit of disruption, a bit of a threat to our public health, a bit of unpredictability is very good for us, and was a very necessary corrective, of course, to 28 years of uninterrupted economic growth and at least that many years of social changes that have been pushing us in the direction of being more individualistic, thinking of ourselves more in terms of our own personal identity rather than remembering ultimately we belong to each other.
Hugh, I read that kindness is good for us. The research says it's a two-way thing. It's obviously kind if we help someone out, but it's also benefiting the person who delivers the kindness. But you say that we shouldn't really try to be aware of this because it turns it into a vanity project. Is it bad to feel good about being kind?
No, it's not bad to feel good about being kind, but what I'm really disturbed about at the moment is the tendency for people, and there have been some books around at the moment that promote this idea, and it's a very attractive idea, of course, that if you want to feel better about yourself, be kind, as though the motivation is to feel better about yourself. Now, you're right, the research available on this does say that generally speaking, when we behave kindly towards each other, there is an emotional benefit to us. It adds to our sense of life satisfaction and to the sense of the meaningfulness of our lives because our focus is on someone else. But that's collateral. And I think it's very easy, if we dwell too much on this, it's very easy to think, so really it's just the old story. It's just people, it's just self-interest. People are being kind in order to feel better about themselves. So I think we can almost discount that. And also, of course, we have to acknowledge that it's not absolutely guaranteed. I mean, there are plenty of circumstances. You're walking down the street, it's raining heavily, someone nearby has dropped their shopping and it's gone all over the footpath. And because you're a human and it's absolutely, you're hardwired to be a social creature, so you just stop what you're doing and help that person pick up all their stuff. You were already running late for a meeting. Now you're running even later and you're soaked to the skin because it's still raining. You don't feel better about yourself. You feel irritated and cranky and why did I have to do that? But you still did the right thing. I mean, every act of kindness contributes to making the world a better place. And there is, of course, some deep satisfaction in knowing that we're participating in that project. But I do think, as you've suggested, I do think it's a very dangerous point to emphasize in case people start to think, well, that's the motivation. In fact, I heard a man in a meeting a few years ago saying, whenever I feel a bit depressed, I go out and try and find someone who needs help. Well, he's kind of exploiting someone's need in order to help his mood. I realise there's a bit of a grey area, but I think it is. It's like what's happening in the business community all over again. We saw this 20 or 30 years ago. Now we're seeing it again, Jane. Good ethics is good business. If we didn't feel better about ourselves when we behave kindly, compassionately towards someone else, would that mean, well, we wouldn't bother doing it?
And what about politicians? Do you think that it's difficult for a politician to demonstrate kindness? Because I get a feeling that sometimes it's equated with a kind of softness or a weakness.
and that's tragic, of course, because, and I agree with you. I mean, that's on the basis of the evidence, we see very few cases where a politician will say, this policy is based on our commitment to kindness. We're going to do this because it's the kind thing to do. Kindness and fairness, perhaps the twin virtues. Very, very little of that kind of thing gets said in politics. And I think that's because the way we run our politics, our particular brand of parliamentary democracy, is based on contest. It's based on confrontation, conflict, competition, all of which is antithetical to kindness, which is the magic ingredient in cooperation. Which is, I mean, we are hardwired to be cooperative. That's the nature of the species we belong to. But of course, our capacity for kindness can be nudged aside or overwhelmed by other pressures like the competitive pressure, or by our rampant individualism, or by our raging ambition, or some other desire we have, which can overwhelm our natural tendency, what Abraham Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. The better angels of our nature can be pushed aside by some less attractive aspects of our nature. And we do see that in politics, where there's so much emphasis on it's all about winners and losers, not just in elections, but in debates, in making points in question time. You know, we won the day. In an election campaign, journalists even talk about who won the week.
Yeah.
You know, it's like football. It's all of that is very damaging to the project of building a kinder society, because that example is influential.
You talk a lot about listening, which is one of my favorite subjects, because I'm trying to train myself to be a better listener every day. And the other week, I found myself in a situation where I was captive audience. So I was in a hairdressing shop, and
Yes.
the hairdresser was very definitive about something political. It was actually, as we were talking about the ban on people coming to Australia from India and the fines.
Right.
And I completely disagreed with her, but I had nowhere to go. You know, I'm stuck there. It's like I couldn't run out. And I tried to listen, and I tried to think, okay, this is just her point of view. But it's a very, very tough one, particularly when
Yes.
you don't choose, in a sense, to have the
Yes.
conversation. What would your advice have been for a situation like that?
To do what you did, Jane, listening is, I think, the noblest, the most potent act of kindness we can perform. And to justify that statement, I think we just have to go back to something we discussed a moment ago, that we are by nature social beings. We belong to a social species. And for that reason, the deepest social desire that humans have is the desire to be taken seriously, to be listened to be understood, to be appreciated. Regardless of whether they're being agreed with, people can easily handle the most robust disagreement as long as they know they have been heard and their position has been understood. Now, that's an act of kindness, in your case, towards someone that you could never agree with. But this is one of the lovely things about human beings, I think, that we are capable of being kind to people we don't like. We're capable of being kind to people we could never agree with, about politics or religion or culture or literature or whatever it might be. We're even capable of being kind to total strangers. Isn't that a lovely thing to say about our species? You and another human being who happens to be your hairdresser are together in a space called a hairdressing salon, and she or he is expressing a view that is absolutely antithetical to your position on a political issue of the day. So if you are trying to make the world a better place, and I know you well enough to know that you are, then listening to a person that you could never agree with helps to make the world a better place. However, you do not lose the right to express your disagreement. I mean, you can terminate a relationship kindly. You can discipline your children kindly. You could terminate someone's employment kindly. You could complain to the neighbour about their barking dog and do it kindly. And certainly you could have a vigorous debate in a spirit of kindness. And that's going back to your example of politics, it's professional politics. That's part of the problem, that so often the debates lose the kind element and they become personal attacks and just raw conflict. That's not how we make the world a better place. And of course, it is the big challenge of listening, which is why it's such a precious gift to give someone else, is that we momentarily step outside the comfort and security of our own personal framework of attitudes, beliefs, values, expectations, and so on, which normally act as a very effective filter against what we're hearing or seeing. This is what psychologists refer to as selective perception. We do it all the time. We half listen, we half hear, we rearrange what we're seeing so it reinforces our prejudices. That's not a gift. The gift is when we set that aside for a moment and say, I know this will be really Carl Rogers, the American psychotherapist and one of my heroes, talks about the courage to listen. And he says, listening is a courageous act because if we are truly listening, if we are listening attentively and empathically, then we are running the risk of having to change our minds.
Yes.
If you're not running that risk, you're not really listening.
You say, and I love this, that kindness is a hard-headed discipline, a motivation, a frame of mind, a way of being in the world. So I wonder, do you say to yourself on a daily basis as you step out the door, is it like putting a coat on? Is it like doing your daily exercises, taking your vitamins? I'm just wondering, some practical advice for people, how do you switch on the kindness, or is it something you don't need to switch on?
I think it does you do get addicted to it. I mean, it becomes simply a habit, a way of being in the world. Because we are hardwired for it, the capacity is always there. It needs to be nurtured, and we certainly need to nurture it in ourselves, both by being kind to ourselves so that we can be kind to others. But also it is a daily discipline to remind ourselves that the default position for a fully flourishing human being is to be kind to other people, even in the most adverse circumstances. Yeah, I have to remind myself of that. And I often do a little review at night. That simple question, was I kind enough? Because I know when we get to the end of the road, when death is imminent, none of us will ever say, was I busy enough? Did I make enough money? Did I kick enough goals, literally or metaphorically? But we are very likely to say, as so many people have reported from being with people who are dying, was I kind enough? Was I a loving enough partner or parent? Was I a good neighbour? Was I a loyal friend? I think it's a wonderful checkpoint. And to train our kids to do it, when the kids come home from school and how was your day? I mean, some parents say, what did you learn today? Well, a much better question is, who were you kind to today? What was the kindest thing you did today? Just to encourage, to nurture the tendency that's within all of us and to encourage thoughtfulness about that aspect of our lives. So, but of course, we all stumble. We all do get distracted by other things that may drag us away from our default position. And I'm in that category as well. But I've become very conscious of it as the necessary way to act if we're going to transform this society. I mean, I've talked in the book about a kindness revolution. We're not in it yet. And it will never start from the top. Revolutions will start by you listening to your hairdresser, or by me remembering to be kind to the neighbour that I disagree with about something or other, and just to treat not to pass someone in the street without acknowledging them. I've just to be intensely practical, I developed a 4-step, what I've called the CARE plan for the kindness revolution, CARE, the inevitable acronym. C for connect. Always connect with people we encounter, not in a busy city street, of course, but if you're walking along a street, there's another person passes you, just connect, just say hello, it looks as if it's going to rain or something. That could be a moment when that person was in despair. That could have been the moment when that person was feeling undervalued, unacknowledged, and just the fact that Jane smiled at her or waved or said something could bring that person back from the brink of despair. So look, someone was nice to me. Someone noticed that I was here. So that's what I mean by connect. Accept. So the C, A for accept, and accept just reminds us that we're not going to change people. I mean, we might over time, but mostly we don't change people. We must accept them as they are. Samuel Johnson wrote about 250 years ago that kindness is in our power, even when fondness is not.
I love that.
You don't have to like people in order to be kind to them. So just accept them the way they are. They are worthy of our kindness because they exist, not because they qualified for our kindness. So that's CA. The CAR, R is for respect. We need to show respect towards everyone we encounter, even if we disapprove of them. Again, they don't have to qualify themselves. They don't have to be respectable. We respect them because we share with them a common humanity. And E, CARE, E is for engage. Become part of the community that you live in. Get to know your neighbours. Join a choir or a book club or something that puts you in touch with the local community that you're part of. I mean, it'll be fun, but not only because it'll be fun, it will put you in touch with needs that exist in your neighbourhood that you could respond to. So that's my little care package.
I love that. So we've got care, connect, accept, respect, and engage. That's a really nice idea to actually go out thinking care. I love that, Hugh. We're nearly out of time. I have to ask you, you talk a lot about looking back at our lives from the perspective of dying, of the time of death, and asking the big questions. Am I the person I want to be? What really matters to me? And was I kind enough? This is a little bit cheeky, but Hugh, do you imagine that we'll all be asked to fill out a survey before we shuffle off the mortal coil?
No, but I think it should be. I think we should embrace the idea of a self-administered questionnaire in our head. I think it is such a good. But don't wait till the end. You know, it's one of the great tragedies for an individual is to get to the end and say, was I kind enough? Was I loyal enough? Was I loving enough? No, I fell short in all these ways. People are often wanting to forgive someone that they've wronged right at the end. What a tragedy to wait till the end, or apologise to someone that they've wronged right at the end. What a tragedy they didn't do that 20 years previously and get on with their lives with that matter having been repaired. So the death perspective, I think the death perspective is a terrific daily perspective.
Well, I certainly will be thinking about that as I go along my way today. And Hugh, your book, The Kindness Revolution, is something I would urge everyone to pick up. It's a wonderful, I hope you don't mind me saying this, it's a manifesto. I find it a personal manifesto that I will keep dipping into as the years go by. And I wish you all the best with defining the kind of kind society Australia hopefully will become after participating in the kindness revolution.
Thank you very much, Jane.
It's been such a pleasure. Thanks, Hugh.
Thank you.